Drink. You've been working too hard, Junho. Let me take care of you tonight.
Don't drink it!
What just happened?
The porcelain cup trembled against the saucer as Seo Jung-ho's fingers wrapped around it. Steam curled upward in thin ribbons, carrying the scent of jasmine and something else, something almost imperceptible, something sweet in a way tea had no business being sweet. The dining hall stretched long and silent around him, lined with men who had killed for him and men who would kill him if given the chance, though tonight no one could tell the difference between the two. His fiancée, Han So-yeon, sat to his right, her hands folded in her lap, her smile so practiced it looked stitched onto her face. "Drink," she said softly, her voice like silk wrapped around a blade. "You have been working too hard, Junho. Let me take care of you tonight." He lifted the cup an inch off the saucer. The room held its breath collectively, the way rooms do when violence has become so familiar that everyone has learned to read silence as a language. His bodyguards stood at attention along the walls, statues in black suits, eyes forward, seeing everything and nothing. "Don't drink that." The voice cut through the hall like a blade through silk, sharp and sudden, and every head turned toward the doorway. A young black woman stood there, a serving tray balanced in her hands, her dark eyes wide but steady, her chest rising and falling fast, like she had run to get there in time. Imani Carter was her name, and she had been employed in this house for exactly 11 days, and in 11 days she had said maybe a dozen words to anyone above the rank of kitchen staff. Han So-yeon's spine went rigid. "Excuse me? Your tea is poisoned," Imani said, her voice trembling but refusing to break. The silence that followed was the kind that pressed down on the lungs. Junho's hand stopped moving. He did not set the cup down. He did not lift it further. He simply held it there, suspended between trust and ruin, his dark eyes sliding from the maid in the doorway to the woman beside him who had poured his tea with her own 2 hands not even 3 minutes before. "That is a very serious accusation," Junho said, his voice low, measured, the voice of a man who had learned long ago that the most dangerous men in any room are the ones who never raise their voices. "I know," Imani said, "and I would not have said it if I were not certain." Han So-yeon let out a brittle laugh, the sound scraping against the walls of the room. "She is new. She does not know how to address her betters. Junho, this is absurd. You cannot possibly—" "Test it," Junho said. He had not looked away from the maid once. One of the bodyguards moved forward, lifted the cup from the table with gloved hands, and disappeared through a side door without a word. The room remained frozen, every breath shallow, every eye darting between the fiancé whose face had gone the color of old paper and the maid who stood her ground despite the way her knees had begun to shake beneath her uniform. Han So-yeon's mouth opened, closed, opened again, searching for words that refused to come. Junho watched her the entire time, his expression unreadable, a man recalculating everything he thought he understood about the woman he had agreed to marry. If you are still here, you are officially part of the family. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. And if you love Afro-Korean stories filled with shocking twists, powerful loyalty, and endings that actually feel earned, like and subscribe so you never miss the next one. And the title card came up 3 months earlier. Imani Carter had grown up in Charlotte, North Carolina, the daughter of a nurse and a long-haul truck driver, the middle child of 3, the one who always noticed things other people missed. She had wanted to study forensic science once, back when her life still had room for wanting things, but her mother's illness had eaten through their savings, and her own ambitions had gotten quietly buried beneath hospital bills and double shifts at a diner that smelled permanently of burnt coffee. When the opportunity came to work abroad through an agency that placed domestic staff in wealthy international households, she had taken it without hesitation because pride did not pay rent and neither did regret. She had not expected Seoul to feel the way it felt. She had not expected the mansion at the edge of the city, perched on a hill overlooking a sprawl of light and shadow, to feel less like an opportunity and more like a held breath. The So family was old money turned into older danger, the kind of wealth that didn't advertise itself but didn't need to, because everyone who mattered already understood what the name meant.
"You ask a lot of questions for someone who has been here a week," said one of the senior staff, a stern woman named Yoon Hae-jin, on Imani's third day, as Imani lingered a beat too long near the study door, listening to muffled voices behind it. "I like to understand the place I'm working in," Imani said, keeping her tone light, easy, harmless. "Understanding is not your job. Cleaning is your job. I can do both at the same time. I'm efficient like that." Hae-jin did not smile, but something in her eyes flickered, the smallest crack in the armor. "You will get yourself in trouble." "I usually do," Imani admitted, "but I also usually get myself out of it." What Imani did not say, what she had learned not to say to anyone in this house, was that she had been trained to notice things long before she ever set foot in Korea. Her father, before the long-haul trucking, had spent 6 years as a detective in Charlotte before a department restructuring pushed him out, and those 6 years had bled into every dinner conversation of her childhood, every lesson about reading a room, about watching hands instead of faces, about understanding that people who are lying tend to over-explain, while people who are telling the truth tend to leave gaps. She had absorbed it all without realizing she was absorbing it, the way children absorb their parents' instincts like secondhand smoke. It was in her second week that she first noticed something wrong with the household's rhythm. The young master of the house, Se Jung-hoo, rarely ate in the formal dining hall, except on nights when his fiancée specifically requested it. And on those nights, the kitchen staff prepared a separate small dish exclusively for him, something his fiancée insisted on serving personally. It was a small detail, the kind of detail most people would not register as strange. But Imani had spent her whole life noticing small details, because small details were where the truth usually hid. She watched Han So-yeon move through the kitchen one evening, watched her hands hover a half-second too long over a particular dish, watched the way she glanced toward the door before adding something from a small vial tucked into her sleeve. Imani had frozen near the pantry, her heart hammering, certain she had imagined it, certain her exhaustion was playing tricks on her perception. But 3 days later, Se Jung-hoo collapsed at dinner, his throat closing, his face draining of color, and the entire house erupted into chaos as bodyguards carried him to a car and rushed him to a private hospital. The official explanation, once he recovered, was in food allergy, something he had never reacted to before, but allergies could develop suddenly, the staff doctor had explained, especially under stress. Everyone accepted the explanation because it was convenient, and because nobody wanted to imagine the alternative. Imani did not accept it. She had no proof. She had a glance, a half-second of suspicious movement, a feeling crawling up the back of her neck that refused to leave. And feelings did not hold up as evidence, not in a house like this, not against a woman who was about to become the lady of the household. So she watched. She watched the way a person watches a pot that has not yet started to boil, but that they know somehow is heating. The first real conversation she had with Se Jung-hoo happened by accident, 3 weeks into her employment, in the east hallway near his study at nearly midnight. She had been carrying a tray of tea back to the kitchen, having been told by Hae-jin to deliver it and then immediately retrieve it, since the young master rarely drank what he requested and almost never wanted the cup lingering in his space. She rounded the corner too quickly and nearly collided with him directly, the tray tilting dangerously in her hands before she caught it, tea sloshing against the rim but not spilling. "You should announce yourself before turning corners like that," Jung-Hoo said, his voice flat, unreadable, though his eyes tracked the tray with an attentiveness that suggested he had been ready to react to a threat a half-second before he registered she was harmless. "I'll start wearing a bell," Imani said, before she could stop herself, the words slipping out in the easy, sharp rhythm she had used her whole life to fill silences that made her uncomfortable. Something shifted behind his eyes, the faintest flicker of surprise. Nobody spoke to him like that in this house. Nobody spoke to him in any house he had ever lived in. "You are the new one," Jung-Hoo said. It was not a question. "Imani," she said. "Imani Carter. You have been here 3 weeks and Hae-jin already complains about you constantly." "She complains because I ask too many questions. I think that's a compliment to my curiosity personally." He almost smiled, almost. The corner of his mouth twitched in a direction that suggested amusement before he caught himself and smoothed his expression back into something colder, something more appropriate for a man in his position. "Curiosity is dangerous in this house. Most interesting things are." He studied her for a long moment, longer than was comfortable, the kind of look that made her wonder if he could see straight through the polite mask she wore for every interaction in this place, the mask that hid the fact that she had spent the last 3 weeks quietly cataloging every strange detail her instincts refused to let go of. "Good night, Miss Carter," he said finally, and walked past her without another word. She stood there for several seconds after he disappeared around the corner, her heart beating strangely fast, though she told herself it had nothing to do with him specifically, and everything to do with the general anxiety of nearly running into the most powerful and most feared man in the entire household at midnight while carrying a tray of his rejected tea. She told herself that for several days, and she almost believed it. The testing began without her realizing it was testing. Small inconsistencies started appearing in her duties, a missing item that reappeared exactly where it should have been the moment she searched for it, a locked door that opened without resistance the one time she happened to need it open, a conversation between 2 guards that she happened to overhear discussing a security breach that, upon closer reflection days later, she realized had never actually occurred. She wasn't sure who was testing her, or what they were testing for.
She passed every test without knowing she was being tested, because she had nothing to hide and nowhere to run her mouth even if she had wanted to. She kept her suspicions about Han So-yeon locked tightly inside her chest, sharing them with no one, not even Hae-jin, who she had begun, despite herself, to consider something close to a friend in this strange and glittering cage of a household. It was Junho who finally broke the pattern, calling her into his study on a rainy evening 5 weeks into her employment, the kind of rain that turned the windows into sheets of gray static. She entered with her hands clasped in front of her, certain she was about to be fired for some infraction she could not name, her mind racing through every possible mistake she might have made. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "I don't think maids are supposed to sit in your study," she said, carefully, though she sat anyway, because something in his tone suggested this was not a request she could decline. "You are observant," he said, ignoring her comment entirely. "More observant than anyone else in this house, including people I pay considerably more than I pay you." Her stomach tightened. "I don't know what you mean." "You noticed something the night I collapsed." It was not a question, and the way he said it left no room for denial, no room for the polite deflection she had been preparing in her mind for weeks in case this exact moment ever arrived. She felt the blood drain slightly from her face. "I don't have proof of anything," she said, quietly. "I did not ask if you had proof. I asked if you noticed something." The rain hammered against the window in long, uneven waves. Imani sat very still, weighing the danger of honesty against the danger of being caught in a lie by a man whose entire life was built on detecting lies before they detected him. "Yes," she finally admitted, "I noticed something." "Tell me." So she told him. Everything. The vial in the sleeve, the hovering hands, the half-second hesitation before Han So-yeon added something to his dish that no one else's dish ever received. She told him in a quiet, steady voice, watching his face the entire time for any sign of disbelief, any flicker of anger that she would dare to suggest such a thing about the woman he intended to marry. He did not look angry. He looked, if anything, like a man confirming something he had already privately suspected, something he was too afraid to examine too closely, because examining it meant accepting the person he had chosen to spend his life with might be the same person trying to end it. "Why didn't you report this to security?" he asked. "Because security answers to people I don't trust, and because I had no proof, and because accusing the future lady of this house of attempted murder without evidence tends to be the kind of mistake that gets people quietly removed from the premises, permanently." Something that might have been respect passed across his features. "You are smarter than you let people believe." "I'm exactly as smart as I let people believe. I just don't advertise it, because people underestimate you a lot less when they think you're harmless." He leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that made her want to look away and made her unable to look away at the same time. "I want you to keep watching her," he said, finally. "Officially, you remain a maid. Unofficially, you report directly to me. No one else knows about this conversation. Not Hae-jin, not my security team, no one." "Why me?" "Because everyone else in this house is either loyal to her, afraid of her, or being paid by someone connected to her. You are the only person here with nothing to gain by lying to me." "That's a very lonely compliment." "It is the only kind I have to give." She should have said no. She understood even then, sitting across from a man whose name made grown criminals lower their eyes, that agreeing to this meant stepping into a war she had no business fighting, a war that could very easily get her killed, deported, or disappeared in ways that domestic workers in foreign countries had little protection against. But something about the way he looked at her, something about the desperation buried beneath his composed exterior, made it impossible to say anything except, "Okay, I'll watch her." "Thank you," he said, and the words sounded foreign in his mouth, like a language he rarely had cause to use. "Don't thank me yet. Thank me when we actually catch her doing something." The weeks that followed transformed into something Imani had not expected, something that felt less like servitude and more like partnership, though she was careful never to use that word out loud, careful never to let herself imagine it meant anything beyond practical necessity. She and Junho began meeting in his study after the rest of the household had gone to sleep, comparing notes, piecing together fragments of suspicious behavior that on their own meant nothing, but together began forming the outline of something far larger than a jealous fiancé trying to eliminate competition that did not exist. "You notice too much," Junho said one night, watching her sketch a rough timeline of Han So-yeon's movements onto a notepad. "You notice too little," she shot back, without looking up. "For a man who runs an empire built on information, you're remarkably oblivious to what happens under your own roof." "I am a mafia boss. I am supposed to focus on bigger threats." "Exactly my point. The threat in your own dining room is the one that's actually going to kill you, not whatever rival syndicate you're worried about this week." He laughed, actually laughed, a low, surprised sound that seemed to startle him himself, like he had forgotten his own capacity for it.
You are fearless. Fear doesn't pay my rent, she said simply. Bills don't care if I'm scared. Neither do you mafia bosses, apparently. So I figured I'd stop being scared a long time ago and just get the job done instead. He looked at her for a long moment after that, something unreadable passing behind his dark eyes, something that made the air in the room feel thinner, more charged. "My family taught me that trust is a weakness," he said quietly, "that the moment you trust someone completely, you have handed them the knife that will eventually be used against you."
That sounds exhausting. It is. And yet here you are, trusting the maid. You're stuck with me now. Mistakes are non-refundable in this house, apparently. He smiled then, a real smile, the kind that transformed his entire face from something carved out of granite into something almost boyish, something that made her chest tighten in a way she immediately tried to dismiss as exhaustion. It was around the 8th week that the situation escalated in a way neither of them anticipated. Han So-yeon announced her pregnancy at a formal family dinner, her voice trembling with what appeared to be genuine emotion, her hand resting protectively over her stomach as the room erupted into congratulations, into clinking glasses, into the kind of celebratory chaos that made it nearly impossible for anyone to think clearly. Imani stood near the back wall, holding a tray of champagne flutes, watching the scene unfold with a growing knot of unease tightening in her stomach. Something about the timing felt wrong, something about the way Han So-yeon kept glancing toward Junho, gauging his reaction, monitoring him like she was checking whether a performance was landing, made every instinct Imani possessed scream that this announcement was not what it appeared to be. She caught Junho's eye across the room for half a second, and the look he gave her confirmed that he was thinking the exact same thing. Later that night, in the study, they spoke in hushed, urgent tones. "She's 3 months along, supposedly," Junho said, pacing the length of the room. "Has she seen a doctor outside this house, an independent one, not your family's personal physician who's been on payroll for 15 years?" Imani asked. "No, she insists on using our family doctor exclusively." "That's convenient." "It is. I need a few days. I think I know how to find the truth, but I need you to trust me completely on this one, even when it looks like I'm doing something that has nothing to do with the investigation." He studied her, something unreadable in his expression, something that looked almost like fear, though not fear of her, fear of how much he had come to depend on her judgment in the span of 2 months. "Okay," he said simply, "I trust you." The words landed heavier in the room than either of them expected. Imani spent the following days befriending the household's medical staff with the kind of patient, easy charm she had perfected over years of waitressing in Charlotte diners, where the only way to survive bad tips was to make every customer feel like they were the most interesting person in the room. She brought tea to the family physician's assistant during her break. She asked careful, harmless-sounding questions about how the household handled medical records, framed entirely as idle curiosity from a new employee trying to understand the family's systems. What she discovered confirmed every suspicion. Han So-yeon had visited the family doctor exactly twice in the past 3 months, and both visits had lasted less than 10 minutes, far too brief for any genuine prenatal examination. There were no ultrasound images filed anywhere in the household's medical records, no blood work, no documentation beyond a single signed statement from the doctor confirming the pregnancy, a statement that, upon closer inspection by Imani's careful eye, used phrasing so vague that it could have applied to almost any condition. She brought everything to Junho on a night when rain hammered the windows, again the same rhythm as the night he first asked her to help him. "She's lying," Imani said, sliding the documents across his desk. "There's no medical proof of any pregnancy. The doctor's statement is vague enough to mean nothing, which tells me he either doesn't actually believe she's pregnant or he's being paid to say she is, regardless of the truth." Junho's jaw tightened as he reviewed the papers, his hands gripping the edge of the desk hard enough to whiten his knuckles. "I want this confirmed, completely confirmed, before I do anything." "I figured you would. I already arranged it." He looked up at her, surprised. "There's an independent clinic downtown, small, private, the kind that doesn't ask questions about why a household maid is bringing in a blood sample under a fake name for testing." Imani allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. "I may have told them it was mine for personal reasons. They didn't ask too many follow-up questions." "How did you get a sample of her blood?" I'm a maid, Junho. I clean up after everyone in this house, including the bathroom she insists on using exclusively because she doesn't like sharing with staff. People leave traces everywhere if you know where to look. I'm not going to explain my methods in detail, but trust me, it's done. Results come back in 2 days. He stared at her for a long, charged moment, something in his expression shifting from gratitude into something far more complicated, something that made the air between them feel electric. You are the most dangerous person in this house, and you have been cleaning my bathroom for 2 months. Technically, I've never cleaned your bathroom. I have standards. He laughed again, that same surprised, low laugh, and this time he did not try to hide it. The results came back exactly as Imani predicted. There was no pregnancy. There had never been a pregnancy. The discovery detonated through the household 2 nights later during a family gathering when Junho calmly produced the lab results in front of his entire extended family and demanded Han So-yeon explain herself. The room fell into a stunned, horrified silence. Han So-yeon's face cycled through disbelief, panic, and finally a brittle, furious resignation as she realized there was no path out of this particular corner. Her own mother gasped audibly. Junho's father's expression hardened into something cold and final, the expression of a man recalculating an entire alliance built on a foundation that had just been revealed as sand. "How dare you investigate me?" Han So-yeon hissed, her composure finally cracking entirely. "Does it matter?" Junho said coldly. "What matters is that you lied about something this significant. I want to know why." She did not answer. She simply stood there, trembling with humiliation and rage, surrounded by a family that had, moments before, been weeping with joy over a child that never existed.
But Imani, standing quietly near the doorway, as she so often did, noticed something the rest of the family missed in their collective outrage. Han So-yeon's eyes kept flicking toward a particular corner of the room, toward a man standing near the back, calm and composed amid the chaos, watching the entire scene unfold with an expression of practiced concern that did not quite reach his eyes. Se Tae-wook, Junho's uncle, the family's most trusted advisor, the man who had defended Han So-yeon publicly on more than one occasion when others questioned her suitability for the family, the man everyone in the household treated with the deference reserved for elders whose wisdom had supposedly earned them a permanent seat at the head of every important decision. Imani filed the observation away carefully, saying nothing, because instincts without proof were worthless in a house like this, and she had learned, slowly and painfully, exactly how much proof mattered here. That night, after the family had dispersed into shocked, whispered conversations throughout the mansion, Junho found Imani in the kitchen, sitting alone at the small staff table with a cup of tea she had not touched. "You did this," he said, sitting across from her without asking permission. "You exposed her." "You did this," Imani corrected gently. "I just found the evidence. You're the one who had the courage to confront her in front of your entire family." "I would not have had the courage without you." She studied him for a moment, this man who terrified entire criminal organizations with a single glance, sitting across a worn kitchen table, looking more lost than she had ever seen him. "You're going to be okay," she said softly. "Am I?" "You found out the truth before she could do any real damage. That's more than most people get." He reached across the table, his fingers brushing against hers, hesitant, uncertain, like a man who had forgotten how to ask for comfort, because comfort was never a currency anyone in his life dealt in honestly. "Imani." "Yeah?" "Thank you. For everything." "You can thank me," she said, her voice softer than she intended, "by figuring out who's actually pulling her strings, because I don't think she planned any of this alone. She's not smart enough." He withdrew his hand slowly, the moment fracturing back into business, back into the war they were still fighting, even as the immediate battle had just been won. "You think someone else is involved?" "I know someone else is involved. I just don't have proof yet. It took another 2 weeks to build that proof, 2 weeks of careful, methodical investigation that brought Imani and Junho closer together in ways that had little to do with the conspiracy unfolding around them. They began sharing meals quietly in his study, late at night, after the household slept, conversations drifting from suspicious financial transactions into coded messages intercepted from Han So-yeon's phone, into the particular brand of loneliness that came from being the most powerful man in a room and trusting absolutely no one in it. My father became boss when I was 12, Junho told her one night, staring into a cup of tea he had finally allowed himself to drink, brewed by Imani's own hands, tested first by her own insistence before he was permitted to touch it. That's a miserable way to live, Imani said. It is the only way I have ever known how to live. Well, she said, leaning back in her chair, I think your father was wrong. I think the people who destroy you are usually the ones you never let close enough to actually know you, the ones pretending to love you while planning your downfall. The real danger isn't love, it's people who fake it really, really well. He looked at her with an expression she had no name for, something raw and searching and hungry for a version of the world that did not match the one he was raised to expect. Like Han So-yeon? He said quietly. Like Han So-yeon, she agreed, but also unlike her, because some people fake love to destroy you, and some people, I hesitated, surprised at my own boldness, some people just genuinely care, without any hidden agenda at all. The trick is figuring out which one you're dealing with. And which one are you? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The question hung in the air between them, heavier than anything either of them had said in the entire 2 months they had known each other. I think you already know the answer to that, finally, she said, or you wouldn't have trusted me with all of this in the first place. He did not respond with words. He simply reached across the small distance between them and took her hand again, and this time he did not withdraw it, and this time she did not pull away either, and the two of them sat in the quiet study with rain tapping gently against the windows, holding on to something neither of them had words brave enough to name yet. The investigation into the larger conspiracy accelerated rapidly after that night, fueled by a partnership that had transformed into something far more personal than either of them had originally intended. Imani discovered, through careful conversations with junior staff who trusted her in ways they never trusted anyone else in the household, that Han So-yeon had been receiving regular, unexplained transfers into an offshore account, transfers that began nearly a year before her engagement to Junho was even announced. This wasn't a love match that turned sour, Imani told Junho, spreading bank statements across his desk that she had obtained through methods she still refused to fully explain. She was placed here, deliberately. Someone wanted her positioned close to you from the very beginning, long before you ever proposed. Junho's expression darkened, his hands curling into fists at his sides. Enraged, betrayed. Who? The transfers come from a shell company, but the shell company is owned by a holding firm, and the holding firm, Imani paused, watching his face carefully, bracing for what she was about to say, your uncle. The silence that followed was deafening, devastated, disbelieving. That is not possible, Junho said, his voice strained, fighting against a truth his mind clearly did not want to accept. My uncle has supported this family for 30 years. He raised me half the time my own father was too consumed with business. He is the only person in this entire house I have ever trusted completely.
I know, Imani said gently. That's exactly why it works. Nobody questions the person everyone trusts completely. That's the whole point of betrayal, Junho. It only works on people who genuinely care. He sat down heavily in his chair, his composed Mafia boss exterior cracking entirely for the first time since she had known him, his head dropping into his hands. Why would he do this? What does he gain from destroying me? Everything, Imani said quietly. If you die without an heir, Who inherits control of the family's holdings? Junho's head snapped up, the answer dawning across his face in real time, horror replacing grief. He does. As the eldest surviving family member, if I have no children and no surviving siblings, he becomes the legal successor. And if Han So-yeon had successfully gotten pregnant before poisoning you, the child would have inherited everything, with her uncle conveniently positioned as the child's guardian and the de facto controller of the entire empire until the kid came of age. Imani finished. It was never about a fake pregnancy succeeding forever. It just needed to buy time. Time to either successfully eliminate you or successfully tie a permanent legal claim to your fortune through a child that didn't even need to be biologically yours, just legally documented as yours. Junho sat in stunned silence, processing the architecture of betrayal that had been constructed around him for years without his knowledge, every kind word from his uncle recontextualized as calculated manipulation, every piece of advice reframed as strategic positioning toward his eventual destruction. I need to confront him, Junho said finally, rising from his chair. Not yet, Imani said, grabbing his arm. Urgent, protective. If you confront him without absolute proof, without enough evidence to make this undeniable in front of the entire family and the entire syndicate, he will simply deny it, destroy whatever evidence exists, and eliminate both of us before we can produce anything else. You need to let me finish building the case first, please. He looked down at her hand on his arm, then up into her eyes, the fury in his expression slowly giving way to something steadier, something that trusted her judgment even when his every instinct screamed for immediate vengeance. How long do you need? A week, maybe less. And if he tries something before then we'll be ready, because this time we know what's coming. The week that followed felt like walking across thin ice over a frozen lake, every step measured, every conversation calculated, every interaction with Seo Tae-wook loaded with attention that Imani had to work tirelessly to mask behind her usual easy, harmless demeanor. She gathered financial records, she tracked down a junior accountant who had handled some of the offshore transfers, and who, after considerable persuasion and the promise of protection, agreed to provide a signed statement detailing exactly how the funds had moved, and at whose direction. She pieced together encrypted messages recovered from a phone Han So-yeon had carelessly left unattended during her humiliation and subsequent house confinement. Messages that, once decrypted by a contact Junho trusted in his organization, revealed direct instructions from Tae-wook detailing the entire plot from its inception. On the seventh night, Imani laid the complete case out across Junho's desk, the evidence stacked into neat, devastating piles. It's done, she said. Everything. Bank records, the accountant's statement, the decrypted messages. He can't deny any of this. Junho reviewed each document slowly, his expression hardening with every page, transforming from grief into something colder, something that reminded Imani exactly why men feared the name Seo Junho long before she ever arrived in this house. Tomorrow, he said. I want this presented to the full family council tomorrow night. Everyone needs to see this. There can be no ambiguity, no room for him to twist this into a misunderstanding. Tomorrow, Imani agreed. He looked at her then, something soft breaking through the cold resolve in his eyes. You risked your life for a family that is not yours, for a fight that has nothing to do with you. Why? Because somewhere along the way, it stopped being just a job. You stopped being just an assignment. I don't really know how else to explain it. Try, he said, stepping closer. You're a good man trapped inside a life that taught you trust was weakness, she said, her voice trembling slightly. And I guess I wanted to prove that theory wrong, for your sake, and maybe a little bit for mine too. He closed the remaining distance between them slowly, giving her every opportunity to step back, to laugh it off, to retreat into the safety of professional boundaries that had long since crumbled into something far more dangerous and far more real. She did not step back. I'm not very good at this, he admitted, his voice rough. I figured, she said softly, smiling despite the tension wound tight in her chest. You're a mafia boss, not a romance novelist. Imani, Junho. He kissed her then, slow and uncertain at first, like a man testing whether the ground beneath him would actually hold. And when it held, when she leaned into him instead of away, the kiss deepened into something neither of them had words for yet, something that tasted like relief and terror and hope all tangled together. They broke apart slowly, both of them slightly breathless, both of them aware that tomorrow would bring a confrontation that could end in violence, in death, in the complete unraveling of everything neither of them had built in the past 3 months. Whatever happens tomorrow, Junho said quietly, his forehead resting against hers, I need you to know that this was real, whatever this is between us. It was never part of the investigation. I know, I whispered. I always knew.
The family council convened the following evening in the same long dining hall where the entire story had begun, the same room where Han So-yeon had once poured poison into a cup with hands that did not tremble. So Tae-wook sat near the head of the table, composed, dignified, every inch the trusted family elder he had spent decades carefully constructing himself to appear as. He had no idea what was coming. Junho stood at the head of the table instead of sitting, a deliberate choice, a man positioning himself as both prosecutor and judge in a room full of people who would soon learn exactly how deep the betrayal against their family ran. 3 months ago, Junho began, his voice carrying across the silent room, someone in this house attempted to poison me. We discovered who carried out that attempt. What we did not discover, until recently, was who ordered it. A murmur rippled through the assembled family members. Tae-wook's expression remained politely concerned, performing the appropriate reaction of a loyal elder hearing distressing family news. Han So-yeon was not acting alone, Junho continued. She was placed in this family deliberately, financed by an offshore account that has been funneling payments to her for over a year, predating our engagement entirely. This is dreadful news, Tae-wook said smoothly, but why are you telling the family in such a formal setting, Junho? Surely this is a matter for private investigation, not public accusation. Because the holding company that owns the shell account funding her, Junho said, his eyes never leaving his uncle's face, is registered under your legal name, uncle. The room went utterly silent. Tae-wook's composed expression flickered for the first time, a crack appearing in decades of careful performance. That is a serious accusation to make without proof, Junho. I would suggest you consider the consequences of slandering a man who has served this family faithfully for 30 years before you continue down this path. I have proof, Junho said simply, and gestured toward the doorway. Imani stepped forward carrying a folder containing every document, every statement, every piece of carefully assembled evidence that had taken weeks to compile. She placed the folder on the table directly in front of Tae-wook and stepped back without a word. Bank records, Junho said, showing the shell company's transfers to Han So-yeon, traced directly back to a holding firm registered under your legal name. A signed statement from the accountant who personally processed those transfers under your direct instruction, and decrypted messages recovered from Han So-yeon's phone detailing your specific orders regarding both the poisoning attempt and the fabricated pregnancy. Tae-wook's hands trembled slightly as he opened the folder, his eyes scanning the documents with the desperate speed of a man searching for any loophole, any angle of denial that might still save him. He found none, because Imani had ensured there were none to find. This is fabricated, he said finally, though his voice lacked any real conviction. Someone is trying to frame thee, perhaps the maid herself, attempting to seize favor by manufacturing a conspiracy. The accountant is willing to testify in person, Imani said calmly, cutting through his deflection. He's currently under protection, waiting outside this room. Should I bring him in? Tae-wook's face drained of color entirely.
If you wanted my empire so badly, Junho said, his voice dropping into something dangerously quiet, you should have simply asked me to step aside. Instead, you tried to poison me. You tried to fabricate an heir to control through Han So-yan. You betrayed 30 years of trust for an inheritance that was never going to be yours to claim by any honest means. Junho, Taewook said, his composed mask finally shattering completely. You do not understand the pressures of this position, the sacrifices I made to keep this family afloat while your father consumed himself with expansion and you played at being a leader without ever truly understanding the weight of enough, Junho said, and the single word carried enough authority that Taewook's voice died immediately in his throat. What followed happened with the swift, brutal efficiency that defined how things were truly settled in a house like this. Taewook was escorted from the dining hall by men who had once called him uncle out of respect, and now regarded him with nothing but cold disdain. His attempt to flee to property that same night was intercepted before he ever reached the gates, his private accounts frozen, his allies within the organization swiftly identifying themselves as more loyal to Junho than to a man who had just been exposed as a traitor and would-be murderer. Han So-yan, already confined to a guarded wing of the mansion since her exposure weeks earlier, broke down completely when confronted with the full scope of the conspiracy now laid bare. She confessed everything, every detail of how Taewook had recruited her years earlier, promising her wealth and status beyond anything she could have achieved otherwise, promising her protection that evaporated the instant her usefulness expired. She was escorted from the property the following morning, stripped of every title and connection to the family she had spent over a year infiltrating, disappearing into a fate that the rest of the household would speculate about for years without ever receiving confirmation. The empire, battered but intact, settled gradually back into a fragile peace over the following weeks. Junho moved through the transition with a steadiness that surprised even his own father, dismantling Taewook's remaining network of loyalists with careful precision, rewarding the staff and associates who had remained genuinely faithful throughout the crisis, including a particular maid who had quietly saved his entire empire from collapse. You could have left, Junho told Imani one evening, several weeks after the dust had settled, the two of them sitting together in the garden behind the mansion as the sun dipped low over the hills surrounding Seoul. I thought about it, Imani admitted, leaning her head against his shoulder, comfortable in a way that would have seemed impossible 4 months ago. And then I remembered that home doesn't really feel like home if you're not in it, she said simply.
He turned to look at her, something soft and vulnerable in his expression, the same expression she had come to recognize as uniquely hers to witness, never shown to bodyguards or business associates or even his own father, reserved entirely for the quiet moments between them. My family will not approve, he said. A Mafia heir marrying a maid from America. They will say it is scandalous. They will say you are beneath this family's standing. Your family also thought Han So-yan was a perfectly suitable choice, though, Imani pointed out dryly, so I'm not particularly worried about their judgment personally. He laughed, the same surprised, delighted laugh that had become one of her favorite sounds in the world. Marry me, he said, the words tumbling out with none of the careful calculation he usually applied to every decision in his life, raw and immediate and entirely sincere. Are you serious right now? Imani sat up straight, staring at him, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. I've never been more serious about anything. You do remember that I poured your tea for 2 months before any of this happened, right? I started this whole thing as your maid. And now you are the only person in this entire empire I trust completely, he said, reaching into his jacket and producing a small velvet box that he must have been carrying for days, waiting for the right moment. Trust does not come from titles, Imani.
It comes from people who stay when staying makes no logical sense. You stayed, through poison, through betrayal, through a war that was never yours to fight. I would be a fool to let someone like that walk away simply because tradition says I should marry someone with a more suitable bloodline. Tears gathered in her eyes, despite her best efforts to keep her composure. This is officially the strangest proposal I've ever heard of. Is that a yes? That's an absolutely, completely, 100% yes, she said, laughing through tears as he slid the ring onto her finger, the diamond catching the last light of the setting sun. The wedding took place 6 months later, smaller than tradition demanded, but larger than either of them had originally planned, attended by family members who had finally come to respect the woman whose intelligence and courage had saved their entire empire from collapse. Imani's own mother flew in from Charlotte for the ceremony, weeping openly through the entire event, marveling at the journey that had taken her daughter from a North Carolina diner to a Seoul garden wedding in the span of less than a year. Jin, the stern senior staff member who once warned Imani that her curiosity would get her into trouble, stood near the back of the ceremony with an expression of fierce, reluctant pride. "I told you that you would get yourself into trouble," she said afterwards, embracing Imani tightly. "You did," Imani agreed, laughing. "You just didn't specify what kind of trouble. This is the best kind, the kind that ends in happiness instead of regret." Months later, settled into a life that still occasionally felt too good to be entirely real, Imani sat in the same garden where Junho had proposed, watching him approach with 2 cups of tea balanced carefully in his hands. He had insisted on making it himself this time, a small, private joke between them that had become a permanent fixture of their mornings together. He set the cup in front of her, then hesitated, staring at it with the same suspicious scrutiny he applied to every cup of tea that had ever been placed before him since the night that started everything. "Most tea isn't poisoned, you know." "You say that every time," Junho replied, settling into the chair beside her, finally lifting his own cup with only the slightest residual hesitation. "Because you check every single cup like it's a crime scene. That was over a year ago. I think we're allowed to drink tea normally now." "I will never drink tea normally again," he said solemnly, though the corner of his mouth twitched with barely restrained amusement. "You ruined tea for me, permanently." "I saved your life and ruined your tea. I'd call that a fair trade." He reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers, the simple gesture carrying the weight of everything they had survived together, every mystery unraveled, every betrayal exposed, every moment of fear transformed slowly into something resembling permanent peace. "Imani Carter," he said quietly, using her name the way he had used it that very first night in the hallway, when she had nearly spilled tea all over his expensive suit and made him laugh for what might have been the first time in years. "So Imani, actually," she corrected, smiling, "or is it Imani So? We never actually settled on the order." "It does not matter what order. What matters is that it is permanent." She leaned over and kissed him softly, the morning sun warming the garden around them, the empire behind them finally secure, the dangers that had once threatened to destroy everything they had built, now reduced to nothing more than a story they would someday tell their own children. A story that began with a poisoned cup of tea and ended, against every possible expectation, exactly where it was always supposed to. With love, with trust, with a happy ending neither of them had ever truly believed they deserved, until they found it together. Thank you so much for watching. Your support means the world to me. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more.